I should have stayed in that goddamn cabin by the lake. 3 days, nothing but trout, silence, and the occasional beer cracked open at dawn. The water didn't talk back. The wind didn't lie. No sideways glances, no passive-aggressive sighs, no carefully orchestrated family talks. Just me, a rod, and the illusion that when I got back home, I'd still be something that mattered. I came through the door with a string of fish and a mind already drifting toward my recliner. The house was too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, loaded quiet. Like the way a deer freezes before a shot. That kind of quiet. Then I saw them. Margaret sat on the edge of the couch like she was afraid of making contact with the furniture. Her knees pressed together, fingers interlocked like she was bracing for turbulence. Michael, our firstborn, leaned forward in the armchair, elbows on knees like he was about to negotiate a hostage release. Brian hovered near the fireplace, hands shoved deep into his hoodie, eyes darting everywhere but me. And Frank, goddamn Frank, in my chair, legs spread, ankle resting on his knee like he owned the place. He looked like he'd just polished off one of my beers. My chair. My beer. My family. What's this about? I asked. Not angry. Just wary. You learn in the service never to show panic. You look a man in the eye even when the bomb's ticking. Michael stood up slowly, like it was his stage now. Dad, he said, voice low but firm, it's time you face it. Frank's been more of a father to us. You know how sometimes your ears ring when a gun goes off too close? That high-pitched whine, like reality just cracked in half? That's what it felt like. My mind tried to process the sentence, and my body just stopped. I didn't move. I didn't blink. Just stared at the kid I once taught to tie his shoes. I looked at Margaret. She flinched. Not a word. Not, that's not fair. Not, don't say that. Just silence. She was letting it land. Letting him say it. Letting Frank sit there like some makeshift king propped up by my goddamn ribcage. I looked at Frank next. He didn't smile, but he didn't look sorry either. He had that same flat expression he used to have back in the desert when we were digging holes and pretending they weren't graves. Except now, he was digging mine. You'd think I'd yell. Throw something. Cry, even. Instead, I nodded. Just once. A small, quiet motion. Almost like a bow. Like a man tipping his hat before walking off the cliff. I turned around. And walked out. Didn't say a word. Left the fish on the counter. Let the door swing shut behind me. I could still hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway like it was counting down the seconds of a life I no longer had. Out on the porch, the night air slapped me in the face. Crisp. Real. Honest. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because crying would have made it feel like the ending. And I wasn't done yet. They thought that was the end of the story. They thought I'd walk off and disappear like some broken old mutt left out in the rain. They had no idea. I didn't slam the door. That would have given them something to hang their guilt on. No. I let the silence speak louder. The hallway felt longer than it ever had before. Like the walls had leaned in to watch me go, to witness this quiet little collapse. The framed photos we'd hung over the years, family vacations, graduations, that stupid trip to Niagara, suddenly looked staged. Like props in a sitcom. Me, grinning like an idiot, arm around the woman who just let our son hand me my obituary in front of my best friend. When I reached the bedroom, I stood at the foot of the bed for a full minute. Margaret's side was still made up, neat as always. My side, a little wrinkled, the pillow dipped in the middle. It looked like I'd just stepped out for a minute. Like I was still part of this house. I sat down and untied my boots slowly. No rush now. Not like there was a wife waiting to ask how the trip went. No boys peeking in to show me a grade or a dent in the fender. Just the sound of fabric brushing against skin and the heavy, patient hum of betrayal. My eyes wandered to the dresser. Top drawer, far left corner, my passport, VA docs, some emergency cash. I'd always kept it there, in case we needed to run. Turns out I was the only one running. I packed deliberately. Not in a rage, not like I was storming out. Like a man going on a trip he planned long ago. Toiletries. The knife Frank gave me back in '99. A few shirts. Socks. I opened the closet and pulled out my old army duffel, the one with the patched up side from that one mission we never talk about. Margaret was still in the den. I could feel it. The gravity of that room, pulling at the house like a sinkhole. I almost wanted her to come up. To follow me. To ask me what I was doing. Maybe just to say my name. She didn't. Instead, as I zipped up the duffel, I heard Frank's laugh, low and short, like someone testing a boundary. I froze. They weren't whispering anymore. No more secrets behind closed doors. Now it was all out in the open, the masks tossed aside like used tissues. My sons hadn't followed me. They just let it happen. Like this was normal. Like I deserved it. I stood in the middle of the room and took one last look. The clock on the nightstand blinked 9:17. The lamp cast a soft glow across the carpet I vacuumed every Sunday. All of it looked so small, like a dollhouse. I walked down the stairs with the duffel slung over my shoulder. Not heavy, not anymore. They were still in the din, murmuring now. I paused at the archway. None of them looked up. Margaret sat curled inward, arms crossed, avoiding my gaze. Michael fiddled with a coaster. Brian stared at the fireplace like it had answers. Frank met my eyes. He didn't blink, didn't smile, just gave me this look neutral, unreadable. But behind it, I swear I saw it, relief, like a man watching a rival fall on his own sword. That's when it hit me. They thought this was mercy, that I'd just disappear into the night and spare them the messy part. That John, reliable John, would walk away clean because that's what he always did, clean up after others, take the hits, stay quiet. I nodded once, turned, and walked out the front door. No slamming, no shouting, just the soft click of the latch catching behind me. It was cold outside. Not bitter, just crisp enough to remind me I was alive. Funny thing is, I wasn't retreating. I was just clearing the board. Margaret didn't sleep that night. Not because of guilt. No, that ship had sailed years ago. She stayed up because the house felt too quiet. Unsettling quiet. The kind that creeps into your skin and makes you feel like something's watching, waiting. She wandered from room to room, pretending to tidy, pretending not to glance out the front window every 5 minutes. John's truck was gone. The porch light flickered slightly in the wind. And still, nothing. No calls. No texts. Just the hollow echo of her choices bouncing off the walls she thought would always be hers. In the den, Frank reclined in the same chair he'd occupied hours earlier. One leg crossed, a glass of whiskey resting lazily in his hand. John's whiskey, of course. He smirked as she passed by, all calm swagger and misplaced confidence. He'll get over it, Frank muttered, barely above a breath. Always does. Margaret shot him a glance, not disagreeing, but not quite certain either. That was the thing about John. He never yelled, never raised a hand, never fought back, just took the hits, the slights, the 1,000 quiet humiliations that accumulated over years like dust in corners. So of course Frank assumed he'd fold again. Of course they all did. Upstairs, Michael sat with Brian on the edge of the bed, voices low. I thought he'd blow up, Brian said, glancing at the door like John might still storm through it. Michael shook his head. Nah, he just walked out. That's worse. He's got nothing left. He knows it. They didn't notice that none of their words felt like victory. There was no rush of relief, no euphoria, just a strange, sterile silence. They delivered the blow, but the man didn't fall. He vanished. They all misread that silence. To them, it was resignation. They thought they'd cracked the foundation and the house would collapse neatly into their hands. Frank had already begun mentally measuring John's garage for his tools. Margaret had opened her laptop twice that night, staring at the login screen for the bank account as if it would reassure her that the world was still spinning the way she expected. She hadn't even tried to call him. Not yet. She figured giving him space would be easier. Cleaner. Let him go lick his wounds and come crawling back once reality hit. After all, he always came back. After every cold shoulder. Every holiday where Frank just happened to drop by. Every moment when Margaret needed more and John quietly gave it. But something was off. Around 4 a.m., Margaret padded into the kitchen, bare feet tapping softly on the tiles. She reached for the cabinet, instinctively, and pulled out the mug John always used. Black ceramic, chipped on the rim. World's okayest dad. A gag gift from Brian back when they still laughed together. She stared at it for a moment, then set it down. The handle was facing the wrong way. Not important, but wrong. Frank came in behind her, yawning like a man who'd conquered something. Coffee. She didn't answer. He poured 2 mugs, slid one toward her. "You look like hell." Margaret blinked. "Something's off." Frank snorted. "You're being dramatic." But her fingers twitched against the mug. Something in her gut, coiled and tight, refused to settle. John hadn't left angry. He hadn't begged. He hadn't broken anything. He'd just vanished. Frank, in his arrogance, mistook that for weakness. The boys mistook that for surrender. But Margaret? Deep down, under the layers of justification and rationalizing and years of quiet betrayal, she knew him. And for the first time in 2 decades, she couldn't predict what he was about to do next. And that scared her more than any yelling ever could. The next morning started deceptively normal, sunlight bleeding through the blinds, the faint hum of the heater kicking on, the soft clatter of Frank rummaging for cereal in the pantry like he owned the damn place. Margaret rubbed her eyes and shuffled to the window. She pulled the curtain back half an inch, expecting to see John's old Ford parked in its usual crooked spot beside the maple tree. The driveway was empty. Not just "he's out getting gas" empty. Not "slept at his brother's" empty. Vacant. No tire marks. No note. No shadow of a man who was ever here. Margaret frowned, lips pressed into a tight line. Frank was in the kitchen again, whistling off-key as he poured himself a bowl of Cheerios, blissfully ignorant. She grabbed her phone, dialed John. 3 short beeps. Then silence. She tried again. Same thing. He hadn't blocked her, he'd cut the line. Disconnected. Like she was a telemarketer, or worse, irrelevant. Margaret stood there longer than she cared to admit, staring at the phone as if it would sprout an answer. Something felt wrong. John wasn't impulsive. He didn't just disappear. Not without a fight. Not without at least some pitiful, wounded monologue about the family, or 25 years. But there'd been none of that. And now, no truck. No trace. She moved upstairs, barefoot on the carpet, her mind racing. The guest room door was open. She poked her head inside. The closet was cracked just enough to see the void. His duffel bag? Gone. The fishing rod that always leaned against the corner wall like a stubborn old dog? Gone too. Margaret opened the hall closet, one she hadn't looked in for months. His boots gone. The battered tackle box with the VA sticker peeling off gone. Then her stomach flipped. She moved fast now, almost frantic, to the garage. The workbench was clean. Too clean. No wrenches. No screwdrivers. Even the red Craftsman toolbox was missing. Just a faint rectangle in the dust where it had stood for decades. Gone too was the old army truck, the one she used to roll her eyes at every time he brought it out to take inventory. The trunk that never left the house. Frank came up behind her, spoon still dangling from his mouth. "You looking for something?" Margaret didn't answer. She stepped back into the kitchen, pulled open the drawer with the bills and house paperwork. She checked the filing folder. His documents were gone. Social Security card, birth certificate, discharge papers, gone. "Did he say anything to you last night?" she asked Frank, her voice flat but trembling underneath. Frank shrugged. "Hell no." He walked out like a ghost. She turned to him. "He took everything." "So?" "He's just pissed. Let him cool off." "No," she said quietly. "This isn't a tantrum. He planned this." Frank blinked. Planned. He didn't leave. He vanished. And just like that, the confidence started to crack. A small, hairline fracture running through the mirror of the little kingdom they thought they'd inherited. Michael came down the stairs, phone in hand. "Dad's not answering." Brian's tried too. Frank waved him off, but Margaret could see it, the way Frank's jaw clenched just slightly. The way his spoon stopped stirring. Something cold bloomed in her gut. John wasn't cooling off. John wasn't waiting. John was already gone. Margaret sat at the dining table in the same robe she'd worn the night before, fingers tapping nervously against the laptop's edge. The morning light didn't reach her eyes. It just poured through the kitchen blinds like a spotlight on a woman realizing she'd lost the script. She opened the banking app. The joint checking account, $6.32. She blinked. Savings 0. She refreshed the page. Twice. Same numbers. 0. $6 and change. No, that's not right," she muttered, clicking into the transaction history. The log looked like a graveyard. Every account tied to John's name closed, liquidated, swept clean. Not a dollar left in any shared space. The last activity was time-stamped yesterday morning, About 10 minutes before she poured Frank his first whiskey and told herself this would all work out. She checked again, hunting for the VA benefits. That monthly deposit that had always arrived like clockwork, compensation for the damage John carried in his bones, in his lungs, in the way he flinched at fireworks. The deposit date had changed. New account. New routing number. Not their bank. Gone. What the hell? She whispered. Frank wandered in behind her, chewing on a half-toasted bagel like he was immune to alarm. You look like you've seen a ghost. She didn't answer. He leaned in, glanced at the screen. What's the problem? He moved the money. Frank laughed. So what? He'll be back in a week, tail between his legs. We'll talk it out. Margaret didn't laugh. She pulled open the drawer beside the fridge where they kept the spare checkbooks, tax documents, random receipts. The safe key was missing. So was the folder labeled emergency. She dropped into the chair like her knees gave out. Michael entered next, earbuds dangling, sipping a smoothie. Mom, do you know why my tuition tracker says pending? I tried logging into Dad's savings plan, and it said the account doesn't exist. Margaret's mouth opened, then closed. He sat across from her, brow furrowing. He wouldn't cancel that, right? No, she said slowly. He didn't. Your college fund's still there. Untouched. Brian came down moments later, phone in hand. Same here. Mine's intact. But Dad's personal savings? Gone. Frank finally stopped chewing. The realization hit them all like a slow, creeping poison. John hadn't just stormed out. He hadn't taken revenge. He hadn't burned bridges. He'd simply removed himself. Strategically. Silently. Completely. Every connection, every tether they once assumed was unbreakable cut. No angry letters. No slam doors. No Facebook rants. Just absence. Cold, surgical absence. Margaret stood, her fingers trembling as she gripped the counter. He's not coming back. Frank scoffed. He's bluffing. He's not. Her voice was flat now. Hollow. He's gone. Not hiding. Not sulking. Gone. Michael shook his head. But why? He wouldn't do this to us. Brian didn't respond. Just stared out the window, where John's truck had once been parked, where the driveway looked permanently rearranged, as if the space knew he wasn't coming back. Outside, a neighbor walked their dog past the house. They paused, looked up toward the window, and gave a small, polite wave. Margaret didn't wave back. She was too busy realizing that for the first time in 25 years, she had no idea what her husband was capable of. And now? He was capable of anything. Frank always had a way of making himself comfortable in other men's spaces. Back in the service, he'd slide into your bunk if you blinked too long, light a cigarette like it was his barracks, his sky, his goddamn war. Some men have that parasite charisma. Just enough charm to convince you they belong, right before they gut the room and start redecorating in their own image. By the third day, Frank had taken John's place at the head of the table. Literally. No one said anything the first time. Margaret placed the plate of eggs in front of him, hesitated a half second, and then sat down at the far end. Michael and Brian exchanged a glance, but said nothing, their spoons clinking against cereal bowls filled with soggy resignation. Frank cleared his throat and said grace. Frank, the same man who once got kicked out of a church wedding for calling the priest a fancy bartender in a dress. Now here he was, bowing his head and thanking the Lord for scrambled eggs, as if divine intervention had handed him a ready-made family. Lord, thank you for bringing us together in this new chapter, he said smoothly, as if John had died, as if he hadn't just evaporated from the life he built. Help us move forward with strength and unity. Margaret flinched at the word unity. She didn't know why yet, but her stomach clenched every time Frank touched something that used to be John's. Frank started dictating chores, told Brian to mow the lawn, even though John always did that himself. Told Michael to clean the garage, Frank's new garage, apparently. He moved John's armchair into the basement, too stiff on my back, replaced it with a leather recliner from Costco, and mounted his old military plaques on the living room wall like this house had always been his. But it was the small things that cracked the illusion. Frank cooked steak on the grill the wrong way, burned it to hell, and called it rustic. John used to let the meat rest. Frank served it like it was on fire. He laughed too loudly at his own jokes. Repeated the same 3 stories from overseas, changing the details each time like a man who had rehearsed lies so often they mutated. Michael started staying in his room longer. Brian began eating dinner in silence, headphones on, nodding blankly at Frank's attempts to connect. "Hey, sport," Frank said one night, tossing a football toward Brian. Brian didn't even flinch. Just let it bounce off the couch and hit the floor. Margaret noticed. She noticed everything. Frank's easy charm had an expiration date, and it was rotting fast. She tried to pretend, tried to replicate the rhythm she used to have with John, but it always ended in friction. Frank didn't like how she folded laundry, didn't like the thermostat setting, didn't like that she still kept one of John's photos up in the hallway. "This one?" he asked one night, lifting the frame of a picture from their 20th anniversary. "You really want this up? Seems outdated." Margaret took the frame from him gently, too gently, and set it face down on the side table. Not gone, just hidden, like the guilt she hadn't expected to feel. That night, she rolled to the far edge of the bed when Frank climbed in beside her. He draped an arm over her, confident, smug. She lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling his weight like a mistake that hadn't stopped growing since the night John walked out. They had gotten what they wanted. John was gone, but so was the air in the house. So was the gravity. It all felt off-kilter, like they'd rotated the picture just enough to make it dizzying. Frank wasn't the man of the house. He was just the loudest one left in it, and everyone could feel it. The letter from the mortgage company arrived folded once, neat and polite, like a warning dressed in Sunday clothes. Margaret opened it at the kitchen table with her 3rd cup of coffee, cold, half-finished, forgotten. At first, she skimmed, expecting some boring notice, maybe another interest rate promo or privacy policy update. Then the words delinquent and past due slapped her square in the face. She blinked, checked the date, checked again. They'd missed the last mortgage payment. Completely. Margaret's first instinct was to mutter John's name. Old habits die hard. But the realization hit almost immediately. His name wasn't on the account anymore. She rushed to the laptop and logged into the bank's auto-pay system. Error. No active payment source available. She clicked again. Same message. Like the house itself had rejected them. She opened the cabinet drawer and pulled out the folder labeled Home. Mortgage statements, tax records, insurance policies. All organized. All touched by John's meticulous hands over the years. But the most recent paperwork? New signatures. Just hers. She hadn't even noticed when he'd done it. Somewhere along the line, while she was smiling across the dinner table at Frank and letting herself believe John would always be there to mop up the mess, he'd removed himself, piece by piece. Disconnected. Legally. Permanently. The next hit came 3 days later. Margaret was in the middle of a half-hearted argument with Frank about leaving the garage light on when the doorbell rang. It was the electric company. Not a bill, an actual rep. They were cutting the power in 30 minutes. Failure to pay. 3 notices. Last chance expired last week. She stood there, barefoot, trying to explain. There must be a mistake, my husband usually. Then she stopped. Corrected herself. My ex-husband used to handle that. Frank was behind her, arms crossed, mouth tight. He didn't offer a word. By nightfall, they were eating takeout by candlelight. Not romantic candlelight. Just the desperate, melting kind that leaves everything tasting like wax and shame. Michael came down the stairs, eyes dark. The Wi-Fi's out. Brian followed behind. What's going on? Frank said nothing. Margaret tried to answer, but all that came out was, it's just temporary. But it wasn't. The gas bill was overdue too. The car insurance bounced. The grocery card got declined at checkout, twice. Margaret found herself putting back items one by one, watching people behind her pretend not to judge. She used to swipe the card with confidence, barely glancing at the total. Now she was counting coins. Frank began muttering things under his breath. Complaints. Gripes. Didn't think he'd be this petty. What kind of man leaves his family to sink? Margaret didn't answer, because she was starting to understand. This wasn't pettiness. It wasn't revenge. It was strategy. John hadn't stormed off. He'd dismantled himself from their lives like a man defusing a bomb. Carefully, clinically, without emotion. She didn't even know when it happened. She just woke up one day and realized the floor had dropped out. And now, the house that once hosted dinner parties and holiday mornings was shrinking. The air colder, the walls tighter. Frank tried to assert control, barked orders about budgets and responsibilities. But the boys didn't listen. Not really. Michael stopped coming home at night. Brian stayed holed up with headphones, eyeing Frank like he was a dog tied too close to the fence. Margaret sat at the dining table, the place where John once balanced the checkbook, a yellow post-it still stuck under the drawer with a scribbled note. Ask Margaret if we need more detergent. She ran her thumb across it. They didn't need detergent anymore. They needed a way to stop drowning. Frank's confidence began to rot around the edges like cheap leather left out in the rain. It started with the little things. The car wouldn't start one morning. John had always tuned it regularly: oil changes, tire pressure, timing belt. Frank popped the hood, stared inside like a man reading hieroglyphics, then slammed it shut and kicked the bumper. Margaret watched from the kitchen window, arms crossed, not offering to help. Piece of junk, Frank muttered as he came back in. He probably rigged it before he left. Margaret didn't respond. But in her silence was a growing, bitter smile, one she'd never admit to owning. That night, the microwave sparked and died. The week after, a pipe under the sink began leaking. John had installed it himself back in '09, and it had never so much as dripped. Now it was pouring out rust-colored water like a wound. Frank tried fixing it with duct tape. Michael came down the stairs, eyed the floor soaked with wet towels, and muttered, "Dad would have had that fixed in 10 minutes. Frank spun around, finger raised. "Well, your dad isn't here, is he?" Michael stared at him. "No, he's not." The air between them froze. That's when it started unraveling. Frank began losing patience. The boys, who once sat smugly beside him in the den like they were crowning a new king, now rolled their eyes when he barked orders. Brian came home late one evening to find Frank rifling through drawers, swearing under his breath. "What are you looking for?" Brian asked. "My damn VAID. I think your mother misplaced it." Brian blinked. "You never served." Frank froze. "Excuse me. You were discharged in basic. You told us that story. Remember? Dishonorably for fighting a sergeant." Frank's jaw tensed. "That's not how I remember it." Brian just walked away. The boys weren't sons to him. They were props. Validation. Proof he'd taken something from John and made it his. But now they were slipping from his grasp, one sarcastic reply at a time. Margaret noticed it too. Frank had stopped shaving. The jokes were darker now. Petty. Mean-spirited. When the heat was turned off due to unpaid gas, he screamed at the customer service rep so loudly that Michael stepped in and took the phone away. Frank slammed the fridge door hard enough to shake the dishes. "You think this is easy? Running a house? Paying bills? Keeping you little bastards fed?" Margaret snapped her head up from the couch. "Don't talk to them like that." He turned on her. "You let him leave. You sat there and let him walk. Now you act like this is my mess." Margaret stood. "You wanted this. You wanted his life. This is it." Frank pointed at the door. "Then go find him. See how far that gets you." But no one moved. No one yelled back. They just looked at him, Michael with disgust, Brian with something colder. Distance. Frank wasn't dad. He wasn't even friend anymore. He was the guy who showed up, sat in another man's chair, and cracked the family down the center. The myth of Frank, cool, tough, loyal Frank, had dissolved under late bills, leaky pipes, and the ugly stench of a man out of his depth. Now, all that was left was a shell in a borrowed house, shouting into a void that no longer listened. The knock at the door came on a Tuesday. Margaret was in the middle of trying to figure out which credit card still had breathing room when she heard it. 3 quick raps, not frantic, not friendly. Just official. She opened it to find a man in a windbreaker, holding a clipboard and a sealed envelope. "Margaret Whitaker?" She hesitated. "Yes." He handed her the envelope like it was nothing more than a pizza menu. "You've been served." And just like that, the last illusion shattered. She closed the door slowly. The paper was heavier than it should have been, somehow sharp around the edges. The kind of paper that cuts your life into slices. Frank looked up from the couch, beer sweating on the coffee table. "What's that?" She didn't answer. She just opened it. Inside were divorce papers. Real ones. Filed. Signed. Stamped. filed from another state. Ohio's jurisdiction didn't even apply anymore. John had filed under abandonment, included a notarized statement, financial disclosures, and most damning of all, a new address. Out of state. Out of reach. Frank leaned forward. Wait, he's filing from out of state? He's been living in Kentucky, Margaret said, voice brittle, eyes scanning the documents. Since when? She didn't answer, because she was too busy staring at the page that detailed their joint assets, or what used to be joint. Everything in John's name had been transferred months ago, to a trust, an irrevocable one. Margaret's name wasn't listed anywhere, not on the house, not on the vehicles, not on the accounts. Even the dog's vet file had been updated to list John's new address. Jesus, Frank muttered. He moved everything. The paperwork was airtight, precise, like a man who'd been planning this before she even realized she'd lost him. A clause in the filing stuck out like a flare. Petitioner has taken all reasonable steps to distance himself from the respondent due to emotional and financial neglect. He wasn't just cutting her off. He was documenting why. Margaret sat down, breath shallow. He's already gone. Frank paced now. So what? You're just going to let this happen? We fight it, right? You get a lawyer, contested. With what money, Frank? He didn't just leave. He cleaned house. He left us the shell. Frank slammed his fist against the wall. He's a coward. No, she said, voice low. He's smart. Smarter than either of us gave him credit for. And in that moment, they both saw it. John wasn't some wounded old dog licking his pride on a riverbank. He was a strategist. He had dismantled the machine piece by piece while they laughed in the den, smug in their betrayal. Now the house sat on unpaid utilities. The taxes were overdue. The car registration had expired. Even the lawn looked abandoned, brown patches spreading like rot. Margaret put her head in her hands. Frank just stared at the floor. The house was no longer a home. It was a coffin of their own making. And somewhere out there, John was alive, quiet, free. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't fought. He just slipped the noose from his neck and tied it neatly around theirs. Frank left on a Thursday. No warning. No fight. No suitcase. Just a balled-up grocery receipt with his new phone number scrawled on the back and a single, cowardly sentence. I didn't sign up for this mess. Margaret found it on the kitchen table, half covered by a dirty coffee mug. His truck was gone. His keys were gone. So was his favorite flannel and the Zippo lighter he used to flick obsessively every time tension filled the room. Which, lately, was always. She stared at the note like it might shift, clarify, turn into something less pathetic. But no, that was it. That was the final act of Frank the Savior. The man who had promised to rebuild this family with her. The man who sat smug in her husband's chair and said grace like he'd been sent by God himself. Gone. By sundown, the boys knew. Brian came downstairs first, eyes bloodshot from too many late nights and not enough sleep. Where is he? Margaret didn't answer. Michael followed, already scrolling his phone, probably trying to confirm what they both suspected. His location sharing's off. He blocked me on Venmo. Brian sat heavily on the couch, head in his hands. He bailed. Margaret nodded. Michael threw his phone across the room. It hit the wall and bounced onto the carpet without a sound. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Brian didn't move. This is your fault. The words were so calm, they almost didn't register. Margaret turned her head sharply. Excuse me. You pushed Dad away, Brian said, eyes locked forward. You let Frank move in before the dust even settled. Michael stood at the window, jaw tight. We were stupid. We thought Frank gave a damn. But he didn't care about us. He just wanted to replace someone. He fooled all of us. Margaret snapped, though it came out more like a plea than a defense. He promised. No, Michael said, still not facing her. He never promised us anything. Just you. That one cut deeper than anything John ever said. Because it was true. Frank had been her fantasy, her escape hatch, a charming echo of youth when things got stale. But he wasn't family. He wasn't grounded. He wasn't real. He was an intruder in John's skin, and now he was gone, vanishing the moment the wait became inconvenient. Margaret sank into the chair, suddenly cold. The house felt enormous and empty, like a church that had lost its faith. Dishes stacked in the sink. light bulbs flickering in the hallway, the trash bin half full with spoiled leftovers no one had the appetite to claim. Michael turned to her finally. "Do you even remember what Dad used to do every Sunday?" She didn't answer. "He fixed things, made pancakes, played cards with us in the garage while the Bears lost again and again. He showed up. Every time." Brian stood, and we told him Frank was more of a father. Michael scoffed bitterly. Frank couldn't even fix a faucet without blaming the sink. They walked away from her, shoulder to shoulder, not in solidarity with her, but with the ghost of the man they had thrown away. Margaret sat there long after the stairs stopped creaking. In her silence, something broke, not loud, not messy, just a slow internal snap. The truth had finally taken shape, hard and merciless. She hadn't lost John. She'd traded him. For smoke. For swagger. For a man who ran the moment the lights went out. And now? She was alone. Not just without a partner. Without a legacy. Without respect. Without anyone. John was gone. Frank had vanished. And the boys? They were already drifting out of orbit, tethered only to the memory of the man she helped erase. It was late January when the call came, long after the holidays had limped by in awkward silences and dollar store decorations. The house was colder now, even with the heat running. Not the kind of cold you fix with a thermostat. The kind that sinks into drywall and memories and makes the air feel heavier than it should. Margaret was in the kitchen, nursing a chipped mug of tea she hadn't bothered to sweeten. The dishwasher had stopped working 2 weeks earlier. She was washing dishes by hand, methodically, like penance. Michael had moved into a cheap apartment near the campus library. Brian was barely around, just long enough to do laundry and remind her, with his eyes, that she was still the reason everything fell apart. When her phone rang, she almost didn't check it. Unknown number. She nearly let it go to voicemail. But something made her answer. "Hello." There was silence on the other end, one long, weighted breath. Then a voice she hadn't heard in nearly 4 months, sharp and calm as a scalpel. Margaret. Her knees nearly buckled. "John." More silence. Not a pause. Control. He was letting the weight settle. Her hand gripped the edge of the sink. She hadn't realized she'd been waiting for this moment. Some part of her believed, despite everything, that he might still be out there, open, reachable. She tried to speak, but no words came. Not apology, not justification, just static in her throat. "You chose Frank," he said. The words were dry, surgical. She opened her mouth to explain, God, to say something, anything. She thought maybe if she just told him she was wrong, that Frank was a mirage, that the boys regretted it too. But John didn't give her the chance. Live with it. Click. The line went dead. She stared at the screen as if it might ring again, but it didn't. Not after a minute. Not after an hour. It never would. The hope she didn't know she was still feeding, quietly, stupidly, died in that second. Not with rage. Not with drama. With certainty. John wasn't lost. He wasn't broken. He was done. There would be no redemption arc. No heart-to-heart. No midnight driveway apologies. He had moved on, and whatever pieces she thought might be waiting for her to pick up, they'd already been swept away, months ago, in some quiet town where John finally stopped being the one who stayed behind. And her? She was exactly where he left her, in the wreckage of her own choices, with no one to blame but herself. There's a silence that doesn't come from absence, but from consequence, the kind that sticks to your skin, seeps into your bones, and waits for you at the bottom of every coffee mug, every echoing hallway, every mirror you try not to look into. Margaret sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in an old cardigan she hadn't worn since before John left. The sleeves were too long now, or maybe her arms had simply forgotten how to carry anything without help. One of the dining chairs was gone. Michael took it when he moved out. Said he needed a spare for the apartment. Brian had left a week after, hauling the last of his things in a borrowed pickup and nodding once, tight-lipped, before disappearing down the road without a backward glance. The house felt like a museum to mistakes now. Piles of unopened mail in the hallway. A broken cabinet door that had been hanging off its hinge for months. The fridge buzzed a little too loud, one of those low, dying rattles that matched her heartbeat. No more group texts. No dinners. No voices. Just her, a stack of unpaid bills, and a photo frame lying face down on the windowsill. Frank was nothing more than a bad aftertaste. She hadn't heard from him since the day he vanished, and she had no intention of chasing ghosts. The couch still smelled faintly of his cologne. Cheap, arrogant, clinging to the fibers like regret. She walked into the living room and stood where John's chair used to be. That space remained empty, not because no one had replaced it, but because no one could. She tried once, bought a recliner from a second-hand store, sat in it exactly once before hauling it out to the curb. It felt wrong, like sitting in a stolen seat at a funeral. John had rebuilt himself with a kind of terrifying precision. Word through the grapevine was that he'd bought a small house near the Appalachian foothills. Quiet, clean, paid in full. Rumor had it he was even teaching a small mechanics class at the local high school. Volunteer. Nothing official. No Facebook account. No photos. Just a new man living a new life, deliberately invisible to the people who once used him as scaffolding. She couldn't stop thinking about the call. Not the words. Those were carved into her memory like headstones. But his tone. Not cruel. Not bitter. Free. And that's what crushed her the most. Because she hadn't just lost a husband. She'd lost the version of herself that existed when he believed in her. Now, she was someone who flinched at kindness, who avoided neighbors, who couldn't bring herself to throw away his mug, the one that still sat in the drying rack, waiting for a hand that would never return. Outside, snow began to fall, light, indifferent. She watched it from the window, the glass cold against her forehead. For a moment, she imagined John standing on a porch somewhere far away, sipping coffee, smiling at nothing in particular, not thinking of her. And somehow, that was the punishment. Not court, not debt, not even loneliness, but irrelevance. She had built a betrayal on the assumption that love was permanent, that forgiveness was a default setting, that John was unshakable. She was wrong. He had simply turned the page. And she was stuck, ink-stained, half erased, left behind on a chapter no one would ever read again. The laughter hit like a slap across the face, but somehow, David didn't even blink. He'd been gripping his wine glass just a little too tightly when Nathan staggered to his feet. Eyes red, voice already halfway drunk and halfway cruel. "Let's be honest," he declared, wobbling slightly. "We never liked you." A few stifled snickers. A clink of a fork hitting a plate. Then someone muttered, "Finally." David didn't look up right away. He could feel the heat rising in his ears, the way it always did when adrenaline kicked in, but he didn't let it show. Instead, he reached for the cloth napkin, dabbed the corner of his mouth like nothing had happened, and glanced across the long polished table. "I mean seriously," Nathan went on, emboldened by the uncomfortable silence. "You showed up with your cheap suits and your sad little flowers and thought you could buy your way into the family. Newsflash, Dave. We're not a charity." That's when Meredith's mother leaned in, took a deliberate sip of her Riesling, and added, without looking up, "You were just a phase. Honestly, we assumed Meredith would grow out of you." The silence that followed wasn't the kind you cut with a knife. It was the kind that smothered. Dense, cruel, and entirely intentional. David's wife, Meredith, just sat there. Frozen. Her face was carefully blank, the way it always got when things got uncomfortable, like a malfunctioning robot trying to find a polite way to abort a mission. She didn't look at him, didn't say a word. Not even a, "That's enough, Nathan." Not even a "Mom, stop." Just silence. David inhaled slowly, watching the flicker of candlelight dance in the glass of water in front of him. Then, finally, he looked up, smiled. It was the kind of smile that says, "I know something you don't," and it cut through the smugness like a needle to a balloon. "I understand," he said softly. The words were almost gentle, like a eulogy. He raised his glass. To family. A few raised theirs hesitantly. A few awkward glances. One of the cousins tried to lighten the mood with a forced chuckle. Then David reached into his coat pocket. No one noticed at first, not until he placed the envelope down next to his plate with a soft thwop. White. Thick. Sealed with a plain wax circle. No monogram. No drama. He nudged it forward on the table, and Nathan, curious, smug, maybe still thinking he'd won, grabbed it without asking. "What's this, your resignation letter?" He barked out a laugh. "Finally realizing you're not one of us." David said nothing. Meredith's eyes finally met his. And for a moment, just a moment, there was something there, like she recognized the look in his face but couldn't quite place it. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Nathan ripped the seal, unfolded the letter with exaggerated flair, and started reading. The room began to shift. It didn't take long. 10 seconds, maybe. A small frown. Then a crease between the brows. Then confusion. Real confusion, bleeding into something darker. He looked up at David like he didn't recognize him. "What the hell is this?" Their mother reached for it next. Pulled it from Nathan's trembling fingers like it was a menu that had the wrong entree printed on it. As she read, her lips tightened. The blood drained from her face. A single hand lifted to clutch her necklace. Her wine glass tilted slightly, spilling a few drops onto the tablecloth. Meredith reached across, took it next. And for the first time that night, maybe in years, David saw her blink like she was waking up from a very long, very delusional dream. Her voice cracked. "David, what is this?" Still, he didn't speak. He didn't move. Just sipped his wine. The letter was short, but it didn't need to be long. Because sometimes, you don't need to raise your voice to burn a room down. You just need the truth and time. And David had been patient for 25 years. Nathan's lips moved as he read, but no sound came out. The bravado that had puffed his chest 5 minutes ago was gone, replaced by the slack-jawed bewilderment of a man who just realized he'd been playing Monopoly while the rest of the table was counting real cash. He blinked, swallowed, blinked again. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, not loud, not quiet, just flat. Like he was hoping the words would trigger a reality check. They didn't. He handed it over like it was burning his fingers. Their mother took it next. Her hands were slow, deliberate, almost dainty, the way she always did things when she was pretending she still had control. She adjusted her glasses, unfolded the paper with the kind of grace you'd expect from a woman who used to host charity brunches in heels so sharp they could gut a man. She got through the first paragraph. Her fingers twitched. By the third, her mouth pressed into a tight, bloodless line. And by the last, she stopped breathing entirely. Then, that thin little laugh. The kind people do when their brain refuses to process the implications. This can't be right," she whispered. "He's bluffing." David tilted his head, watching her like a surgeon observing a dying pulse on a monitor. "Right, Meredith?" her mother hissed now, waving the paper like it was infected. "Tell me this isn't real." Meredith didn't answer. She was already reaching across the table, snatching the letter like she'd just realized this party might be her own wake. She scanned the words faster than the others, not even pretending to maintain composure. Her brows furrowed, lips parted, and then those eyes. Not angry, not even shocked, just scared. "David," she whispered, her voice now raspy. "What is this?" He didn't answer, just lifted his glass again and drank slowly, like the wine tasted better now. The silence mutated. What started as awkward tension stretched into something suffocating. The table of 15 siblings, spouses, cousins, suddenly seemed miles apart from each other, each person frozen in a different pose of disbelief. Even the waiter hovering near the kitchen door had stopped moving. Because they felt it. That sickening shift in power. That moment where everyone silently realized that David, boring, beige, background David, was holding the leash. And they'd been barking for years without noticing it was around their own necks. Nathan cleared his throat. This says you own my company stake." No one replied. His voice cracked louder now. "It says you funded the seed round under a shell LLC. That you've been collecting distributions. That the trademarks are mine," David said calmly, interrupting for the first time. "All of them." More silence. Their mother stood slowly, bracing herself with one hand on the table. Her rings clinked against her glass as she reached for it. She missed. "This isn't legal," she said. "It is," David replied, still polite, still poised. Page 3. "Your signature's notarized." Meredith flipped to the third page, eyes wide, her nails digging into the paper like she could claw out a different ending. And then she saw it. Her own handwriting. Her own sloppy initials. The same ink she used to sign off on everything when she was too busy redecorating the Aspen property to read what she called the boring crap. Her voice broke. "David, You told me. I told you exactly what you wanted to hear, he cut in, gentle as a scalpel. The table creaked as people shifted in their seats, uncomfortably aware that something permanent had just happened. No shouting, no broken glasses, no slammed fists, just one letter, and the kind of silence that only follows after someone drops a guillotine and walks away. Meredith stormed out of the dining room like a woman walking off a stage she just realized wasn't hers. The garden lights outside flickered across her face, casting shadows that made her look older than she ever let herself believe. David was already at the valet stand, calmly waiting for his car like he hadn't just tossed a live grenade into a room full of people who'd never lifted a finger in their lives. David, she hissed behind him. You didn't turn. David, louder now. You don't get to walk away like that. He finally turned, expression calm. Not smug. Not cruel. Just settled. Like a man who's already moved on from this scene hours ago. You'll understand soon, he said. Then he got in the car. She stood there, arms crossed, fist clenched like she could throttle answers out of the air. The valet gave her a side glance, then quickly looked away, pretending not to hear the tremor in her breath. Back inside, the air had changed. The wine had stopped flowing. The hum of small talk was dead. Nathan sat back down like someone had stolen the floor out from under him, blinking at nothing. By 10:30 p.m., he was trying to buy shots at a downtown bar with a group of friends who hadn't yet heard the dinner's postscript. He slapped his Amex on the counter with performative flair, only for the bartender to frown and tilt the screen toward him. Declined. Nathan laughed. Nah, run it again. Must have been a glitch. It wasn't. 3 cards later, he was drinking water, alone, wondering what the hell had just happened. Meredith's mother tried to call her lawyer that same night. Once. Twice. 4 times. Then a text. Urgent. Call me. Now. No reply. She called the firm directly. Receptionist, ma'am, I was told Mr. Reynolds is unavailable for the foreseeable future. He's no longer representing you. What? I can refer you to another partner. I've known Harold Reynolds for 20 years. I'm sorry, ma'am. He said to direct all inquiries to Mr. Rosenblatt, David Rosenblatt. The silence on the other end was broken only by the faint sound of her wine glass smashing against the wall. Meanwhile, back at the house, Meredith sat in the kitchen in one of David's old t-shirts, barefoot, her phone in one hand, bank app open. She tried their joint checking. Locked. The emergency account? Frozen. Savings? Gone. Transferred. She refreshed again. And again. The screen didn't change. A message popped up. For assistance, please contact the trust administrator. What trust? She whispered aloud. She tapped into her private slush fund, just a small account she thought he didn't know about. $14,722. It blinked to $0 before her eyes. She gasped like she'd been slapped. No, 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 no. She ran to the office drawer, pulled out an old ledger. Passwords. Legal docs. She'd ignored all of it for years. That was David's thing. She curated the lifestyle. He managed the gears behind the curtain. Now, the curtain was gone. And so was everything else. She texted him. What are you doing? Talk to me. No reply. At exactly midnight, the doorbell rang. She rushed to open it. A delivery driver handed her a small parcel. No words. Just a clipboard and a signature. Inside? One black key fob. A note attached. Not everything is locked. Just the parts you don't own. She collapsed against the hallway wall, shaking. She finally understood what the rest of them hadn't yet. David wasn't breaking the family. He was just reminding them. They were never his family to begin with. By Monday morning, Meredith had developed a tic in her left eye. The kind that came from too little sleep and too many lies unraveling at once. At first, they all assumed it was a bluff. An act. Some midlife tantrum dressed up in spreadsheets and wax-sealed letters. Her mother barked at their family lawyer's voicemail, like she was still someone who commanded urgency. Nathan kept saying, he can't actually own my company. I founded it. But as the week crawled forward, the facts did what facts do best. They didn't care what anyone felt. It started with a call from Nathan's CFO, who asked, quietly, almost apologetically, if he knew that 52% of their voting shares had been assigned to a holding firm 3 years ago. What the hell are you talking about? Nathan snapped. The answer came in the form of an email, a scanned agreement, dated, witnessed, and very, very real. A convertible note David had funded to help family, which, once unredeemed, had triggered an automatic equity conversion. The worst part? Nathan had signed it. Twice. With his own little flourish. He called the firm's legal rep in a panic. They've been reporting to Rosenblatt Holdings LLC for 6 quarters now, the guy said. You didn't know? Nathan didn't answer, because by then, he was already vomiting into his kitchen sink. Meanwhile, Meredith's mother returned home from her spa week in Carmel to find a notice pinned discreetly to the foyer mirror. Property reassessment visit scheduled. She called the management firm. A cheerful woman informed her that, per trust owner authorization, the property is being evaluated for sale. I own this house, she snapped. Oh. The woman replied with that chirpy tone that always means doom. I believe the deed was transferred in 2017. Under White Fern Trust. That's Mr. David Rosenblatt, correct? Her mother hung up mid-sentence and started rifling through old filing cabinets, ones David had once offered to help organize. She declined, of course. She never liked to look closely at the strings tied to her comfort. Turns out, they were all wrapped around his fingers. Meredith tried to call the bank next. The business account tied to her wellness podcast brand, also gone. Absorbed into a new entity, Clearwater Equity Group. Owned and operated by, you guessed it, every gift David had given over the years, every loan to Nathan, every down payment, help for her cousin's boutique, every private school tuition check for their niece, had come with a signature, a clause, a date. David didn't make offers. He made transactions. She dug through their storage room and found a plastic bin of paperwork she used to joke about. David's hoarder drawer. Tidy folders. Color-coded tabs. Contracts labeled things like NE_wine expansion _2019 and Gwendolyn Smith _retainer ADJ 2021. She yanked one open. Inside, scans, digital timestamps, even voice memos. David reading terms aloud for documentation. She remembered rolling her eyes when he used to say, someday this might matter. Now she couldn't breathe. The kicker came Thursday. Her phone buzzed. A message from her old friend Dana. Hey, just heard through the grapevine. Is it true David owns the vineyard? The whole thing. The vineyard was her last sanctuary. Her quiet place. Her post-cheating cleanse project. She didn't reply. She couldn't. Because she had just opened her inbox to a message with the subject line. Asset Transfer Confirmation, Golden Vista Vineyards, LLC. Signed digitally. Finalized. Filed. David's name, clean as a whistle. She stared at it for a full 5 minutes before her mother burst into the room, face red, hair wild. You knew, she spat. You let him in. You let him do this. Meredith shook her head. No, I didn't know. I thought he was just being generous. Her mother's laugh was jagged. He was being strategic. The irony was almost biblical. They spent years treating David like an outsider. Now they were all standing outside the walls of their own empire. And David was inside, holding the keys, reading the fine print. By Friday morning, Meredith had traded her usual silk robe and collagen smoothie for a power blazer and black coffee, both worn with the desperation of someone trying to rewind a demolition in real time. She marched into her attorney's office at 9:01 a.m. sharp, makeup immaculate, voice already sharpened to a blade. I need to talk to you. Privately. Her lawyer, Tom Lassiter, an old family contact who'd done their prenup and once helped her mother sue a charity for misusing a donation plaque, gestured her in with that cautious expression lawyers reserve for clients who think charisma beats documentation. She launched into it immediately. David is trying to destroy me. He's fabricated contracts, locked accounts, and he's trying to claim assets he gifted to my family. I want a restraining order, an emergency freeze, whatever the hell you can do. Tom let her speak. Listened. Took notes. Then opened a folder. I was actually going to call you, he said. Her smile faltered. Why? He slid the folder across the table. Inside, not one document. A dozen. Emails from her, agreeing to investment terms. Video call recordings where she laughed and said things like, You're the numbers guy, babe, just tell me where to sign. One email in particular stood out. Subject, Updated prenup language. Review and sign. Attachment. Prenup _ Rosenblatt _ addendum _ 2020.pdf. Her reply. Looks fine. Thanks. Signed and scanned. Tom watched her face as she flipped through it all, her breathing growing faster. Where the hell did he get all this? He didn't get it, Meredith. You gave it. He tricked me. No, Tom's voice was firm now. He documented you. Thoroughly. Repeatedly. She shoved the papers back. This doesn't change anything. We had a prenup. I want to challenge it. Tom sighed. Meredith, that is the prenup. What? It was amended. Legally. After your second affair. She blinked, frozen. That was handled. That was private. Tom stared at her. You agreed to an amendment in exchange for not disclosing the identity of the second party involved. It was mutually beneficial at the time. She felt the blood drain from her face. I thought it was symbolic. It was ironclad. Her nails tapped the leather armrest like a ticking clock. What about the house? Our primary residence. I'm still on the deed. Tom gave a tight smile. Not after the trust restructuring in 2021. You waived those rights when you accepted the settlement package for the Aspen retreat withdrawal. What withdrawal? Page 7, he said, tapping the folder again. It was there. In ink. Initialed. Dated. A reimbursement clause for funds liquidated from Rosenblatt Primary Trust to resolve prior non-disclosed property acquisition disputes. Translation. She had sold her piece of the house back to him without realizing it, while he let her think he was just covering shared expenses. Panic started to curl behind her voice. He can't do this. He can't just trap me like this. Tom straightened his tie. He didn't trap you, Meredith. He documented you. The words hit harder than any scream could. She stood abruptly, chair scraping back against the floor. Then get me out of this. Find a loophole. He hesitated. I can request discovery on the timelines and try to argue coercion or unequal power dynamic. Try. But I'll be honest. He's been preparing for this longer than you have. That was when she realized something deeper than panic had begun to take root in her gut. David hadn't just reacted. He had anticipated. He saw her drift away, emotionally, physically, and never raised his voice. He'd simply started building. Not a fight. A fortress. And now she was pounding on the gate like an invader, begging to be let back in. By Sunday afternoon, Meredith was no longer being ignored. She was being blamed. It started with a group text from Nathan that hit like a hammer to her already fraying nerves. Nathan, you said he was harmless. You said he was just happy to be included. Then a follow-up. Nathan, he owns the office we lease. I checked. She stared at the screen, heart thudding. Then came the call. Her mother. No hello. No warmth. Just acid. You brought him into our world. Meredith blinked. Mom, I was 23. We were in love. You were naive, her mother snapped. We let you marry beneath you, and now he's strangled all of us with that misplaced charity. You didn't let me marry anyone, Meredith shot back. You hated him from day one. Well, now I hate him correctly, her mother hissed. Then, silence. And then, colder. You fix this. Or don't bother coming to the board meeting next week. Meredith opened her mouth to respond, but the line had already gone dead. She collapsed onto the edge of the bed, staring at the floor like it had betrayed her too. The family she had defended, placated, made excuses for, was now turning its fangs toward her. Because David hadn't just dismantled their money. He'd dismantled their myth. For decades, they had treated him like the outsider, the awkward appendage clinging to their polished brand of East Coast legacy. They let him fund the Thanksgiving trips, the charity galas, the emergency remodels, the bailouts, the startup bridges, but always with the smug nod of nobles accepting tribute. Now the nobles were broke, and the man they mocked was holding the deed to the castle. At 5:12 p.m., she received an email from Nathan's assistant marked urgent. Subject, change of leadership notification. Effective immediately, Rosenblatt Holdings has executed its rights to restructure Cedar Rise Tech. All executive decisions will be subject to review by the board's new chair. She clicked the attachment. New chairperson, David Rosenblatt. She couldn't stop the scream. It clawed out of her throat before she even knew it was coming. Then came a message from her Annalise. Measured. frosted with that family tone of polite annihilation. This is causing reputational damage, Meredith. The Foundation has postponed your speaking engagement indefinitely. I suggest you lay low. Her cousin Brielle unfollowed her on Instagram. Her brother's wife left the family group chat with a passive-aggressive, "Good luck, everyone." Meredith sat in the silent kitchen as the refrigerator motor hummed behind her, a half-drunk bottle of wine beside her like a forgotten ally. No one was calling to check on her. No one asked how she was holding up, because the deeper truth had landed. Every contract, every transaction, every thread of their privilege that touched David's quiet generosity was a fuse. And now the whole damn tapestry was burning. They weren't just mad. They were terrified. And she was the one who invited the fire into their house. By the end of the week, it wasn't just the family whispering. It was everyone. It started in the softest of places, brunch. An innocuous comment over mimosas at the Elmwood Club, murmured by a woman in pearls to another in pastel cashmere. Did you hear what David Rosenblatt did to them? Honestly, brilliant. Within 48 hours, that brilliant became a virus infecting every high society conversation in town. In the language of their world, where smiles were weapons and charity events doubled as territory markers, David's silent restructuring wasn't scandal, it was strategy. And in their world, strategy was sexy. It turned out, the rich don't fear revenge. They admire it. By Monday, Nathan's pitch to a major angel fund in Palo Alto collapsed mid-call. His deck had barely reached slide 5 when the lead investor politely asked, "Can you clarify the ownership cap table? We've heard there were changes." Nathan scrambled, stuttered, made promises. 2 hours later, a formal decline email landed in his inbox with a cool subject line. "We've decided to pass at this time." The reason was unsaid. But the CC'd contact? David. Meredith got hit next. She arrived at a boutique board meeting for a green startup she had paraded in interviews as her visionary side hustle, only to find her name had been removed from the welcome placard. She approached the chair. "Oh," the woman said, blinking with mock surprise. "We sent the notice to your assistant. Your seat's been reassigned to another investor." "What investor?" Meredith snapped. "I believe. Rosenblatt Group." Meredith didn't respond. She just turned and walked out, heels clicking like gunshots on marble. 2 days later, her mother received a terse letter from the Heritage Women's Foundation. "We regret to inform you that your honorary membership will not be renewed for the upcoming term. We are grateful for your past support." No explanation. No condolence. Just a quiet burial of relevance. And then, the final gut punch. A lifestyle blog known for soft gossip among the coastal elite posted a glowing profile titled, "The Quiet Rise of David Rosenblatt, the investor everyone ignored, until now." The article painted him as a visionary, a man who played the long game, who turned decades of ridicule into dominance, who built a private trust empire beneath the noses of legacy families too arrogant to audit the books. There was even a quote from a hedge fund exec, "David's the new mold. Polite, patient, ruthless with a smile. I'd back him blind." They called him elegant, underrated, strategic. Meredith stared at the screen in disbelief, bile rising in her throat. He hadn't just destroyed them financially. He'd made them irrelevant. The worst part? No one was asking for her side. Not a single friend. Not a single outlet. Because in the currency of reputation, David wasn't the man who'd snapped. He was the man who had waited. And now, the circle that once mocked him was passing around his business card. The for sale sign appeared in front of the estate on a quiet Thursday morning, like a gravestone no one remembered approving. Meredith didn't notice it right away. It was the gardeners who stopped trimming the hedges first. Then the mail stopped arriving. Then came the knock, 2 men in pressed polo shirts, holding clipboards and camera gear. "Realty staging," one of them said, barely glancing at her. "This is a private residence," Meredith snapped. The taller one consulted his paperwork. "White Fern Trust property. We have access authorization from the managing agent, Mr. Rosenblatt." The name landed like a slap across her cheek. She tried calling the lawyer. Voicemail. She called David. It didn't even ring. Straight to silence. She stormed out to the driveway, ready to drive somewhere, anywhere, but the black Mercedes was gone. In its place, a faint outline where the tires had sat, dust disturbed. She ran to the garage. The Jaguar? Gone. The Lexus? Missing. The Bentley SUV her mother claimed as a gift after her knee surgery? No trace. Later that day, a flatbed truck rolled through the neighborhood, towing what was left of their fleet. A nosy neighbor posted a video on Instagram, "Hard times in Paradise Valley." Meanwhile, Nathan was trying to salvage what remained of his startup like a man scooping water from a sinking boat with a fork. That morning, he got the final nail, a registered letter stamped with a logo he didn't recognize, Clearbridge Holdings. The letter began plainly. Per prior agreements and majority share authority, Cedar Rise Tech will enter transition effective immediately. You are hereby removed as CEO. No fanfare. No lawsuit. No dramatic showdown. Just a formality he never saw coming. He called his COO in a panic. "Did you know this was coming?" he shouted. The line was quiet. Then, "Nathan, he's been meeting with the board for months. You were on vacation. You forwarded the invites." He hung up before he screamed. Meredith, meanwhile, sat curled on the kitchen floor, still barefoot, still in the same yoga pants she'd worn for 3 days straight. Her phone buzzed. David's name. But it wasn't a call. Just a text. The vineyard? Already sold. She blinked. Once. Twice. Then dropped the phone onto the tile like it burned. She clawed through her emails, searched every inbox. There it was. Transfer confirmation. Golden Vista Vineyards. Signed. Executed. Wire transfer complete. Buyer, Rosenblatt Consolidated. Buyer rep, D. Rosenblatt. She called him again. No answer. She called his assistant. Then his new firm's front desk. Voicemail. She screamed into the silence, voice cracking, throat raw, tears clawing their way up through rage and disbelief. "I built that with you." No reply. Just the soft hum of the fridge and the vibrating silence of a woman losing everything she didn't realize wasn't hers. She collapsed against the dishwasher, shoulders shaking, mascara smudged like war paint. David hadn't left a mess behind. He'd taken everything and left her with nothing but silence, because even that, he now owned. She messaged him late, well past midnight. 3 words, "Please meet me." An hour later, "I was wrong." By morning, 3 more, "Can we talk?" David replied the next day. 1 line. Dinner. 7 p.m. Alessios. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a summons. She arrived early, clutching her clutch like it could hold her together. Her hands trembled. The hostess led her to the table where David already sat, alone, sipping water, no wine. Not tonight. He didn't stand when she approached. Just gestured to the seat across from him like a CEO acknowledging a late arrival to a meeting he'd already started in his head. "Thank you," she whispered, sitting. "You asked," he said. The waiter hovered. Meredith waved him off. David didn't. He ordered his usual, striped base, grilled vegetables, sparkling water. No dessert. She didn't even pretend to glance at the menu. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking before the second word left her lips. "I was cruel. And stupid. I should have seen what you were building. I didn't mean to." "To what?" he asked. She swallowed. "To turn everyone against you." He tilted his head. "You didn't turn them. They were always facing the other direction." Her eyes welled up. "I know I don't deserve anything. But maybe we could slow things down. You've made your point. I'm asking you not to destroy what's left." David took a long sip of water, wiped his mouth with the linen napkin. "I already did," he said. She blinked. "But there's still more to lose." He leaned forward, resting his forearms gently on the table. His voice dropped to something more intimate, more dangerous. "For them, yes. For you." He paused. "This is the mercy." The sentence lingered like smoke. She stared at him, bewildered. "What does that mean?" He offered nothing, just signed a receipt, stood, and left her at the table before the entrees even arrived. Meredith sat frozen for a moment, then ran after him, but he was gone before she hit the sidewalk. She drove home in silence, hands shaking on the wheel, rehearsing arguments, apologies, pleas. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe there was still a crack in the fortress. Then she pulled into the driveway and stopped cold. The lockbox was on the door. Not hers. His. Her house key didn't fit anymore. Confused, she yanked out her phone, opened the county assessor's website, and punched in the parcel number she knew by heart. New owner, White Fern Legacy Trust. Trust manager, Rosenblatt Holdings. Her name? Gone. Not even in the records. She checked the mail slot. Inside, an envelope with a single-page document. No letter. No explanation. Just the title reassignment paperwork. In place of her signature, one line typed in clean Helvetica font. Executed on behalf of the prior joint holder as per revocation clause. Article 4, Section B. She felt the ground tilt under her feet. David hadn't just taken the house. He'd timed it perfectly, after the dinner. She thought the table had been set for reconciliation. Turns out, it was her final meal on borrowed property, and she was already trespassing. 3 days later, a thick white envelope arrived at the estate's rusting gate, hand-delivered by a courier wearing mirrored sunglasses and zero curiosity. The family housekeeper brought it in, unopened, unassuming, and laid it gently on the kitchen counter beside a now-dead vase of roses. Meredith's mother, Eleanor, spotted it while sipping her afternoon tonic, her 5th that week. The wax seal was plain. No logo. No crest. Just one word typed on the front in clinical, centered print. Eleanor. She opened it like someone defusing a bomb carefully, theatrically, as if control could still be salvaged with posture. Inside was a crisp eviction notice from a property management firm she'd never heard of. Beneath it, for stapled asset transfer confirmations detailing the liquidation of family holdings she'd long forgotten were even active. And at the bottom, a handwritten note on thick paper. Just one sentence. I was never your son-in-law. I was your silent investor. Until now. Her hands trembled. For years, she had told people David was Meredith's little rescue project. She had once said to a friend over martinis that marrying David was like adopting a stray cat, pathetic but manageable. Turns out, the stray had acquired the house, the land under it, and every account tied to the family trust she thought she controlled. And he hadn't barked, hadn't bitten. He bought. She stumbled back from the counter, the envelope falling to the floor like a snake shed of its skin. She turned to Meredith, who had just walked in from the guest wing, pale and hollow-eyed, clutching a mug of untouched tea. What did you do? Eleanor shrieked. What did you do? Meredith froze. What is it? He owns everything. Her mother screamed, voice raw with disbelief. He didn't just take back what he gave us. He owns the damn mortgage company. The title firm. The bank. Meredith. What? The bank. Look. She shoved the transfer papers at her daughter. It all feeds into something called Rosenblatt Financial Group. It's his. All of it. Meredith scanned the documents, her breath catching on each line. Asset custodian. Rosenblatt Capital. Property reassignment processed via Rosenblatt Title Group. Loan servicing transition to Rosenblatt Mortgage and Holdings. He hadn't just burned the bridge. He bought the river and built a dam. Eleanor was now technically trespassing on land she had once called her legacy. Her kitchen. Her castle. But now, even the doormat outside the front door belonged to David. And as the realization bloomed in full horror across her face, she let out a low, guttural sound, not a scream. Not even a cry. Just a collapse. She crumpled into the antique dining chair, eyes wide, jaw slack, the letter dangling from one hand like a loaded pistol she hadn't known she was holding. Because the truth was now undeniable. They hadn't just underestimated David. They built their lives on borrowed money. And forgot to ask who signed the check. The message came in while I was refilling the bird feeder. Cardinals had started nesting near the hedgerow again, and I liked keeping them close. I'd just come inside and wiped my hands when the screen lit up. Married my boss ring-clinking glasses have fun being a loser face-blowing kiss. That was it. No context. No hesitation. No decency. Vanessa always had a flair for dramatic punctuation, but it was the word loser that struck with surgical precision. Not the fact that she was in Vegas. Not the marriage. Not even the emojis. It was that word. She wanted me to feel small. To reduce 28 years of shared history, dinners, mortgages, and grief into a punchline she could send while sipping champagne in a penthouse. My thumb hovered over the screen. Most men would have called, maybe screamed, maybe pleaded. But not me. I typed one word. Acknowledged. Then I hit delete on the thread. And with that, the woman I'd once built a life with evaporated into pixels. I walked to the study. The room was quiet, like everything inside it had been holding its breath. My desk drawer slid open with that familiar cedar creak. The folder was there, exactly where I'd left it 3 years ago, marked in sharp black letters, contingency. I never expected I'd have to open it. But then again, I never expected Vanessa would wear sequins to funerals either. She was the kind of woman who smiled at mirrors like they were old friends and left subtle perfume on every damn thing she touched. It used to feel intoxicating. Now it smelled like rotten velvet. Inside the folder were 3 sheets, each one pre-filled: names, contacts, directives. I'd prepared for this long before there was even a hint. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I understood her. I picked up my phone again. No trembling, no anger, just sequence. First, I forwarded the account freeze order to the bank liaison. Next, I messaged Diana, my estate manager, to rotate codes, restrict biometric access, and trigger protocol B on the main gate. Lastly, I sent a single line to Bernard, my lawyer of 19 years. Proceed under Clause 7.1, breach. He responded instantly with a thumbs up. Never thought a man with gout could be that fast. While the rest of the world screamed about self-care and feelings, I moved with the silence of someone who saw it coming. Not that exact message. No one predicts being stabbed via emoji, but the signs were all there. The new gym membership she never used. The late Zoom calls with makeup on. The way she'd stop sentences halfway when I walked in, as if life was a stage and I'd entered too early. Still, none of that mattered now. Emotion is expensive, and I had accounting to do. I poured a single glass of scotch. Neat. Lendronac, 21. The good stuff, not for celebration, not for grief, just for clarity. Then I stepped out onto the patio. The sun was bleeding out over the ridgeline, dragging its last rays across the lawn like a slow exhale. I stood there, still in my work pants, button-down shirt open at the throat. Somewhere in the distance, the neighbor's wind chimes caught a lazy breeze and clinked out a hollow tune. I thought of Vanessa's message. Loser. Cute. From a woman who once cried over missing a hair appointment. Who thought a trust fund was a personality. Who told me, just 6 weeks ago, that she needed space to explore opportunities. Apparently, marriage to her superior in a hotel ballroom counted. I didn't feel rage. I didn't even feel heartbreak. I felt movement. When I went back inside, I turned off the porch light. She'd be landing back in town in 3 days. She'd expect flowers, apologies, maybe even a scene. What she'd find was something very different. And as I slid the folder back into its drawer, now marked with a new post-it in motion, I realized something. She thought this was the climax of her little rebellion. But for me, it was just the opening move. The last time Vanessa went to Vegas, she brought me back a novelty mug that said, "What happens in Vegas?" with a lipstick stain printed along the rim. She thought it was funny. I kept it on a shelf in the garage, next to the broken hedge trimmer and the old wedding photo album she never once asked to look at again. Now she was back in Vegas, but this time, the joke was on her. And the mug? I took it off the shelf that morning and dropped it straight into the trash bin without ceremony. No drama, just removal. By sunrise, I was in the office with a fresh pot of coffee and my laptop open. The financial dashboard stared back at me. Our joint accounts, 6 of them in total, humming with 30 years of stability. Her face still smiled in the corner from the login photo. One of those professional portraits she insisted on, back when we still went to charity galas. I didn't blink. I entered the authorization code. Then the freeze request. Not closure, not yet. Just suspension. A pause on her ability to move, to spend, to leech. Next came the trust accounts. The ones I'd built for her interior design consulting business, which had yielded 2 paying clients in 8 years, both of them family friends. I moved the funds out, redirected the routing to a separate legal entity under my sole control. All clean, all silent. The digital equivalent of flipping light switches before exiting a room forever. Then the estate. Diana, my estate manager, answered on the second ring. She was always an early riser, sharper than most men I'd met in my career. No small talk. I gave her 5 instructions. Her voice didn't waver. Within 30 minutes, the gate codes were reset. Vanessa's thumbprint was scrubbed from the biometric readers. Her closet was discreetly cataloged for personal effect removal. The dogs, mine now, always mine, were scheduled for relocation to my mountain property in 2 days. Should we alert the staff? Diana asked. Only the vetted ones, I said. The rest can be rotated out. Copy that. By noon, the fortress wasn't just secure, it was walled. Every entry sealed. Every vulnerable node hardened. I had no intention of becoming another sob story with a golf cart and a broken heart. I'd read the forums. I'd listen to the sad bastards at the club whimper about alimony and betrayal. Not me. Because while Vanessa was sipping mimosas with a man who probably said things like synergy without irony, I was pulling up the surveillance logs. The footage was all there. Her little rehearsals before she'd leave for work, how she'd wait in the driveway on her phone, pacing, smiling. She wasn't waiting for an Uber. She was waiting for a black Audi. Tinted windows, always the same plate. Outstepped her boss, every damn time. I scrubbed through the dates. I had a timeline. I had license plates. I had camera angles. The whole affair mapped out like a military operation, just without the honor. I packaged it all into a digital file titled Breached. Sent it to Bernard with no text. Just the file. He'd know what it meant. We'd discussed the clause years ago, during one of our post-Will Scotch sessions. Vanessa had laughed when I brought up infidelity protections. Who cheats after 50, she said. Apparently her. After that, I logged into the travel app we both shared. A little oversight on her part. She'd never bothered removing me as a co-admin, probably assuming I'd never use it. Her hotel booking was under her maiden name. The marriage license hadn't been processed yet. Vegas could be fast, but not that fast. Still married. Still in breach. I took a screenshot. Another brick in the wall. There was grief, sure. You don't spend almost 3 decades with someone and walk away untouched. But the grief was old. It had died long before she ever got to Vegas. It had been dying slowly, in half kisses and missed dinners, and those 1,000-yard stares over the breakfast table while she scrolled through her phone and pretended I wasn't there. This wasn't retaliation. This was containment. A man sealing off a burning wing of his home to save the foundation. I stood in the doorway of our master bedroom later that night. Her side of the bed was untouched. It always was, even when she was there. Cold sheets. Perfumed pillows. Like sleeping next to a ghost with Wi-Fi. I didn't cry. I didn't drink. I just shut the door. From this point forward, every move would be deliberate. No more second chances. No warning shots. Just closures. Permanent and surgical. She wanted to marry her boss? Fine. She just forgot who used to write the checks. At exactly 2:47 a.m., the word acknowledged was sent. No period. No emotion. Just clean, final. I stared at the screen for another full minute, letting the silence around me settle like dust on an unused piano. Then, just as deliberately, I opened her contact card, the one still labeled V. Read hard, and hit delete. Phone number. Email. Shared calendar. Gone. Not blocked. Not archived. Deleted. Like cleaning a cut before stitching. That was the first erasure. The second began before sunrise. At 4:12 a.m., I sent a secure message to Eli. Technically, he runs a digital forensics firm. Realistically, he's the guy corporations call when they need an online footprint scrubbed, inverted, or dissected without a trace. I had him on retainer for work-related projects. Now I was cashing in for something personal. Need a scrape on all VC's socials. Prioritize visual assets. Full metadata pull. Include associates tagged in the last 6 months. Backdate anything cross-referenced with GPS, include Mr. RK. Vanessa didn't understand digital permanence. She thought posting wedding photos at 1 a.m. in a rented Vegas suite would remain a private thrill between her and her new walking cologne dispenser. She hadn't considered metadata. She hadn't considered timestamps. She definitely hadn't considered me. Eli didn't respond with words. He just sent a green check mark and the timer emoji. The man works like a bloodhound with access to public records and a caffeine addiction. While he dug into the feeds, I turned to my financials. Not ours. Mine. See, back when we were still pretending to be a team, Vanessa told me she wanted kids. We'd tried for a while. No luck. But I'd quietly build a trust anyway. Not for a child, for someone worthy. My nephew Ryan. Good kid. Teaches robotics at a public high school, Still drives the same Honda I gave him after college. Never once asked for money. At 5:22 a.m., I opened the old trust, renamed it, and injected it with a seven-figure sum from one of my overseas liquid accounts. Legal guardian me. Beneficiary, Ryan and his future projects. The funds were routed through a separate entity, a Delaware-based nonprofit I set up back in 2015 for tax purposes. Now it had purpose, real purpose. Then came the third move. I opened my private brokerage window and searched for the new husband, Randall Keith, the man who stole my wife. Funny how that term doesn't sting when you know the merchandise was expired. Randall was flashy, surface deep, and recklessly overconfident, the kind of guy who confuses leased Lamborghinis with actual wealth. I ran a preliminary background profile on him years ago when Vanessa first started quoting him like a guru. I knew he was leveraged to the hilt. 3 properties, none fully owned. A tech consulting firm that thrived on government contracts, sensitive contracts. Ones that require stability. Ones that don't look kindly on messy headlines. I pinged my contact at a boutique intelligence firm that tracks executive portfolios and quiet offshore movements. Flag RK for passive monitoring. Financials. Travel. Communications. Don't touch. Just observe. That's the beauty of restraint. You don't attack. You watch. You learn. You let your enemies think they're safe. By 6 a.m., the kitchen lights were on. I brewed coffee in silence. 1 cup. No second pour. I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. Sleep is for people waiting for something. I wasn't waiting. I was positioning. This wasn't revenge. Revenge is petty, loud, driven by ego. This was removal. Systematic deletion. Like uninstalling corrupted software from a server you spent your whole life building. Vanessa thought she'd rewritten the script. That her text, smug and cheap, was the final page of our story. But the truth? Her message wasn't an ending. It was the moment I put pen to paper and started writing hers. The black SUV crawled up the driveway like it owned the place. I was watching from the library window, nursing a bitter espresso and an even bitterer smirk. The curtain stayed drawn. I didn't need to be seen. That wasn't my role anymore. My role now was orchestration, and I had arranged every second of what was about to unfold like a symphony of legal humiliation. She stepped out first. Vanessa. Beige heels. Black designer coat that probably cost more than the maintenance budget for the koi pond. Aviators on. Hair blown out and curled like she just walked out of a shampoo commercial. And beside her, Randall, the newly minted husband. If you could call someone a husband when the marriage license wasn't even processed yet and their bride was still legally married to someone else. He looked like a PowerPoint presentation with veneers. Collared shirt open to the 3rd button, Bluetooth still clipped to his ear like a man who thought he was too important to fully arrive anywhere. And trailing behind them 2 uniformed officers. She came back with police. Now that part actually made me laugh. Vanessa must have imagined this like a movie. Arrive in a convoy, march up to the front door with a badge in the background and smug righteousness in the foreground. Maybe even throw in a few fake tears if she felt theatrical. Instead, she was greeted by Joseph, 64, former Marine, estate security lead for the past 8 years. The man once wrestled a mountain lion off the property's fence line with nothing but a flashlight and an unshakable tone of voice. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. He didn't even blink when Vanessa barked, "This is still my house." Joseph just reached into his coat pocket and calmly handed a thick, stapled packet to the nearest officer. "Injunction from county court," he said, voice even. "Filed 4 days ago. Emergency ex parte order. She's no longer a legal resident here as of this morning. You'll find the notarized deed adjustments on page 5. The officers flipped through it. I watched their brows knit. One of them nodded slowly. The other turned to Vanessa. "Ma'am, this changes things." And just like that, her face broke. Not fully. Just a flicker. A tiny shift in the jaw. A tick at the corner of her mouth that always gave her away when things didn't go according to script. Randall stepped forward, puffing his chest like a rooster with a bank loan. "I don't know what kind of circus this is, but we're married. She has rights." Joseph didn't even respond to him. Instead, he handed him a second envelope. Much slimmer. Much colder. "Cease and desist," he said. "Filed this morning. Your presence here violates conditions of a protective estate boundary clause. You're not permitted within 500 feet of the property without prior authorization or risk civil liability and escalation to criminal trespass. Randall opened the envelope, eyes darting. Vanessa leaned over his shoulder. And there it was, the moment. That exquisite moment. The smugness died. No more champagne-flavored confidence. No more phone-in-one-hand power couple strut. Just blinking in disbelief. This is absurd, she finally muttered. This house was placed in a revocable living trust under a single grantor after your marital breach, Joseph replied without a beat. You'll find that documentation in your copy of the injunction. Pages 7 through 10. I could almost hear the sound of her heels cracking against the flagstone as she turned back to the officers. Do something, she hissed. One of them shrugged. They've got paperwork. Court-stamped. If what's in there holds up, you're trespassing. Randall looked like he was about to protest again, but this time he hesitated. The Bluetooth earpiece blinked red once, then died. Maybe symbolic. Maybe just dead battery. Either way, he was suddenly very quiet. Vanessa's voice dropped an octave. You can't just lock me out of my own life. Joseph didn't answer. He didn't have to. The gate behind them began to hum, slow and deliberate, closing. Doors closing. Chapters closing. A life closing. And I stayed behind the curtain, watching like a man who'd already buried the past and was just waiting for the dirt to settle. They stood there for a minute longer. I'll give them that. The denial phase ran deep. But eventually Randall tugged Vanessa's elbow. Come on, he muttered. We'll handle this another way. She didn't move right away. She just stared up at the house, her lips parted, that expensive coat flapping slightly in the wind. The wind that now carried no welcome for her. No warmth. No place. And as they turned back toward the SUV, her voice, sharp but cracking, reached the porch. This isn't over, Miles. From behind the glass, I smiled. It had barely begun. The thing about Randall, Mr. Executive Visionary, is that he mistook charisma for immunity. Men like him don't get caught because they're clever. They get caught because eventually, someone like me starts watching. And once you start watching a man like Randall, you see the seams almost immediately. How he touches a little too long in photo ops. How mentorship dinners with junior staff somehow always happen in hotel lounges. How every promotion conveniently involves someone suddenly leaving HR. I didn't just watch. I archived. Quietly. Patiently. And then, 3 days after the gate incident, I reached out to Benji. Benjamin Lee, or Benji to everyone who knew him before he got famous. He was a nobody intern back when I was consulting at his startup's merger review team. Nervous, allergic to gluten, and couldn't iron a shirt to save his life. But the kid could write. And he could smell rot through mahogany doors. These days, he was a rising star in business journalism, clean-cut, careful, and absolutely ruthless when pointed in the right direction. I didn't text. I didn't email. I sent a manila envelope via courier. No return address. Inside, a USB, a printed timeline, and 3 highlighted NDAs, all publicly filed, all long since expired. The USB contained a curated map of Randall's internal behavior spanning 8 years. Not gossip. Not screenshots. Just cold, hard timestamps and facts. 3 women in 2 departments who received bonuses 4x higher than their peers after international trips. An assistant who transferred offices 2 days after reporting a hostile work environment, who then vanished from the corporate org chart. A merger-acquisition meeting in Hong Kong that resulted in 2 resignations and a non-disclosure-heavy settlement. All of it documented. All of it publicly available. None of it, until now, connected. Benji didn't need a push. He called within 12 hours. Jesus, Miles, he whispered over the line. Do you know what this is? Proof, I said. But I'm sure you'll call it a pattern. Why now? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. By the end of the week, the article dropped. The headline wasn't scandalous. Benji was too smart for that. He went subtle. Corporate culture and executive accountability, a case study in pattern recognition. But the body? Lethal. The timeline unfolded with eerie precision. No names were directly listed, not in full, but Randall was unmistakable to anyone who'd ever been in a boardroom. The article linked to public case files, lightly redacted emails, and whistleblower interviews, none of it defamatory, all of it verifiable. That same afternoon, Randall's company issued a press statement. We take these concerns seriously. And then came the real fireworks. I knew at least 2 board members personally. We'd crossed paths during a consultancy retreat in Tahoe a few years back. Real estate guys with clean suits and dirty secrets of their own. But if there's one thing board members hate more than bad press, it's unpredictable risk. The emergency session was called. Randall was placed on administrative evaluation. The firm stock, already a glass castle on a windy cliff, dipped 3.7% by market close. Not catastrophic. Not public yet. But insiders felt it. Emails got quiet. Slack channels froze. Procurement orders delayed. And Vanessa? She finally noticed. That night, she tried to call me. The number was blocked. Instead, she emailed from a new account. Subject: This is cruel. There was no body. Just those words. I didn't reply. Because this was never about cruelty. She thought Randall was the upgrade, the better model, the man who could give her new energy, as she once called it. But Randall wasn't her reward. He was the target. See, when you spend your life building systems, you learn that viruses don't just show up. They're invited in, usually wearing suits and smiling too wide. So I didn't attack her. I simply removed her host. And now? She was watching him rot, realizing the stench was contagious. The cashier gave her that look, the one that starts polite but ends in suspicion. Sorry, ma'am, the woman said, tilting the terminal slightly toward Vanessa. It's been declined. Vanessa blinked once. Then again, like the machine must have glitched. She leaned in closer and tapped the card again with the tip of her manicured nail, that same gold card Miles had added her to years ago. The one she used for spa weekends, handbags, and that business trip to Tulum with Randall last fall. Declined. Again. Her mouth curled, but not into a smile. Run it manually. The woman tried. Still declined. Vanessa's voice dropped into that tone I knew too well, the mix of passive-aggressive and entitled she used on waiters, assistants, and once a nurse who dared to ask her to silence her phone in a hospital lobby. This is a platinum account. There must be a problem on your end. The cashier, now visibly uncomfortable, handed the card back. Maybe call the number on the back? Vanessa didn't. Not immediately. She yanked another card from her wallet, the corporate one Randall gave her after their wedding. She hadn't even memorized the PIN yet. Also declined. She left the store empty-handed, red-faced, and pacing furiously toward her car. Inside, she finally pulled out her phone and called the only number that still picked up when she dialed. Her lawyer, Amanda Grossman, who, ironically, she only met through my connections. The conversation started confident. Then Amanda began to talk. And the unraveling began. Vanessa, Amanda said, measured but firm. Nevada doesn't recognize your new marriage as valid. Not yet. And honestly, possibly never. What the hell does that mean? It means Miles filed first. Cited breach of contract. Infidelity clause. It triggered the automatic prenuptial override. Remember the prenup you signed before the Tuscany ceremony? Vanessa scoffed. That old thing. Amanda didn't laugh. That old thing is airtight. And it's enforceable in both jurisdictions. A pause. Then, more quiet panic bleeding into her voice. Well, we split everything. It's community property. Not when the clause is triggered, Vanessa. He filed before you could. He proved breach. You get what you came in with. That's not much. Silence. He filed everything before I got back? He filed everything before your plane even landed. You got served at the gate. You didn't even read it, did you? Vanessa said nothing. Amanda exhaled. There's more, she continued, almost gently now. Every asset listed under joint ownership was either premarital, inherited, or trust-shielded under a clause you signed willingly. And because you left the state during active legal proceedings without notice and married someone while still legally married, your claim to equity is severely compromised. Vanessa's voice went flat. So what the hell do I own? Another pause. Then Amanda's words came soft, like someone easing in a scalpel. Your clothes. A few personal items. And some liability exposure from your new husband. The line went dead. Vanessa sat in her car, gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. Her phone buzzed with a text from Randall. Did you use the card again? It bounced. What's going on? She didn't respond. She just stared out the windshield, into the heat shimmer of a Las Vegas parking lot. while the reality began to crystallize. No assets, no access, no protection. The marriage she flaunted like a trophy on social media was legally void. The bank accounts were ghosted. Her husband's career was imploding. And somewhere, back in the estate she once called hers, the man she betrayed was calmly watching it all unfold, probably with a glass of that expensive scotch she used to mock him for drinking alone. The real punch wasn't that she had nothing left. It was that everything she thought was hers had never really been hers at all. They say Vegas can strip you bare if you stay too long. But for Vanessa, it only took 17 minutes inside a Bank of Nevada branch on West Sahara. She arrived overdressed, as usual, silk blouse too bright for business hours, heels that clicked like punctuation marks across the marble tile. She walked in like she owned the place, like the building had been expecting her. And then the teller asked for ID. Then the teller asked her to wait. And that's when the camera caught her. A grainy iPhone photo, taken by someone waiting behind the frosted glass of the adjacent mortgage office, snapped just as Vanessa's hand shot up to her temple. Her lips were parted. Red. Too red. Her mascara had begun to smudge. The phone in her hand showed a visible declined notification. She wasn't screaming. That would have been almost sympathetic. She was pleading. Quietly. Desperately. The photo made its way to a mid-tier financial gossip blog 2 days later. A blog I've contributed to under the pseudonym North Market Foresight for over a decade. The headline? Luxury wife, empty wallet. What happens when marrying up goes down? The caption? Just 4 words. Crying doesn't unlock equity. I didn't write the piece. That would have been too obvious. But I provided the tip, the context, and the digital trail. The blog did the rest, connecting her to Randall, to the recent HR drama, to the growing stink around their impulsive union. By the end of the day, that photo was embedded in 5 Reddit threads, 2 LinkedIn posts deleted within hours, and was the punchline in a finance meme that read, "Marry the boss, inherit his problems." It got worse. Randall's employer, already reeling from Benji's surgical expose, moved fast. Too fast. Someone had found the private calendar leaks. Someone else had matched flight logs with vendor billing inconsistencies. By Monday, Randall was placed on unpaid leave pending internal review. His LinkedIn went from founder, mentor, husband, to just consultant. The husband part disappeared the same day. Meanwhile, I was sitting in a quiet office 2 time zones away, across the table from Bernard and 2 other attorneys, finalizing the ownership transfer of 3 properties, the lake house in Big Bear, the Scottsdale condo, and the DC flat Vanessa had once told her friends she'd finessed out of our marriage. The paperwork was straightforward. We'd planned this months in advance, even before Vegas. All I needed was breach. She delivered that in heels and sequins. "Anything you want to do with the properties?" Bernard asked casually. "Sell? Lease? Donate? Transfer the lake house to my sister," I said. "She actually enjoys it. And the Scottsdale unit? Let it sit. DC." I looked up. "Let's offer it to the nonprofit that runs housing for domestic abuse survivors. They could use something elegant." Bernard paused, then nodded. "Elegant it is. No anger. No celebration. Just math." Vanessa's unraveling wasn't explosive, not yet. It was ambient. Like water damage slowly warping the floorboards of a house she no longer had keys to. And yet she still didn't get it. She still thought this was about her. That she was the center of the storm, not just the first domino. But the truth? She was never the main character. Just the opening act in a larger, far more elegant takedown. She came alone this time. No Randall. No SUV. No uniformed backup or lawyer in tow. Just a gray rental sedan that looked 2 weeks past due on the cleaning. It idled at the base of the private drive like a dog too afraid to approach. The security feed flickered to life the moment her tires touched the first stone of the circular entrance. Joseph, ever punctual, was already in position near the gate. I watched from the upper library, not that she could see me. The windows were treated, mirrored from the outside. She only saw her own reflection. She stepped out of the car slowly, shakily. Hair tangled. No makeup. No designer sunglasses. Just sweatpants and an old hoodie I vaguely recognized from a trip we took to Lake Tahoe, probably the last time she seemed like a person instead of a brand. And she was crying. Openly. Not the carefully constructed sobs she used to practice in the bathroom mirror when she wanted to guilt trip me into weekend getaways or forgiveness. These weren't tears for attention. These were tears for loss. She shuffled toward the gate, clutching something against her chest. Maybe a photo album. Maybe a letter. Maybe the ashes of whatever fantasy she thought she was still living in. "Please," she said, loud enough for the microphone embedded in the pillar to pick it up. "Please, just let me talk to him." Joseph didn't move. He just stood there, hands behind his back, posture military perfect. I didn't know," she stammered. "I made a mistake, okay? I didn't think he'd. I thought," she broke off into a sob. "Can you just tell him I'm here? Just for a minute?" Joseph reached into his inner coat pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. He didn't step through the gate. He placed it gently into the tray slot between the bars and pressed the intercom button. "This is for you." She hesitated, then grabbed it with both hands like it might burn her. I could see her mouth moving, but she didn't say anything audible after that. Her eyes scanned the letter fast at first, then slower. Her expression shifted from hope to confusion to horror. She reached the final page. I knew the exact sentence she was reading when her knees buckled slightly. "All personal effects have been inventoried and relocated to a secured storage unit at 42 Worthington Avenue, Unit 117. Access code enclosed. Nothing left here requires your presence. No salutation. No signature. Just closure. Surgical and sterile." She crumpled forward, knees to the gravel, hands over her face. The letter slipped from her grip and fluttered against the gate like a surrender flag. She didn't scream. She didn't beg again. She just sat there, quietly unraveling, the sound of her sobs carried gently through the pines. From my seat in the study, I took one last sip of coffee and turned away from the monitor. It was done. The woman outside wasn't the Vanessa I'd married, or even the Vanessa who'd betrayed me. She was just a shell, a monument to bad choices, faded ambition, and an ego that never learned to read fine print. Letting her in wouldn't bring closure. Locking her out already had. Randall was officially terminated on a Thursday. The statement from his firm came at exactly 3:04 p.m., right after the closing bell, buried in a press release about corporate restructuring. Classic strategy. Drop the bomb when everyone's looking elsewhere. But for those who were watching, the message was clear. Following an internal investigation, we have severed ties with Randall Keith, former Senior VP of Development, due to violations of ethical guidelines and fiduciary policies. We remain committed to accountability and transparency. Translation: he was a liability with a tan and a Bluetooth headset. Turns out, one of Randall's ex-colleagues, a woman he'd mentored during an overseas client retreat, came forward the moment Benji's article started making the rounds. Her story matched timelines in the whistleblower reports. The final nail? An email thread Randall had been dumb enough to forward to his personal Gmail. An intern flagged it. I didn't even have to lift a finger for that part. Vanessa, meanwhile, was still floating on the belief that she could fix this. That if she just talked to the right person, cried on the right shoulder, batted her lashes at the right lawyer, she could claw her way back into something resembling status. Instead, her calls weren't returned. Her former friend group, mostly wives of execs who saw her now as radioactive, went silent. A few blocked her outright. The ones who stayed on group chats kept her muted. And then she made her last mistake. She tried to sue. Through Amanda, who, God help her, still hadn't fired Vanessa as a client. She filed a motion for damages. Emotional distress. Reputational harm. Constructive eviction from the estate. The whole 9 yards. Amanda had warned her. Repeatedly. You are not in a position of leverage. You walked out. You married someone else. You left a digital trail from here to hell and back. Vanessa didn't listen. She never did. The filing lasted 72 hours before it collapsed under its own weight. My legal team submitted an exhibit, a collection of messages from Vanessa, pulled from cloud backups she'd forgotten to disable. Some texted, some emailed, all time-stamped, all authenticated. He's such a boring old calculator. Once Randy's promoted, I'll finally be rid of this loser. I'm taking what I deserve, and he can keep the dog. The final one, dated just before the wedding. By the time Miles notices, I'll be Mrs. Keith and halfway to Italy. The judge didn't even request a hearing. The claim was dismissed with prejudice. Vanessa wasn't just denied, she was discredited. Then came the ripple effect. She was quietly added to an industry blacklist. A private list of reputation risks that high-profile firms circulate like folklore. Not illegal, just informal. A whisper here, a nudge there. She applied for a consulting role with a lifestyle brand, ghosted. Tried to relaunch her interior design firm with rebranded social accounts. Followers tanked. A Reddit post surfaced with screenshots from the blog article. Someone posted a side-by-side of her crying in the bank and her wedding photo. Caption: from champagne to declined. She sold the ring. Tried renting out the condo Randall had put in her name. Found out it was still under lien. The cracks turned to canyons. No bridge. No lifeline. And that's when she finally understood what I meant. That single word, acknowledged, wasn't surrender. It was a eulogy. For the life she burned. For the lies she told. For the empire she thought she was building on a foundation of manipulation and Botox. She had married a man she thought could replace me. But she didn't replace me. She inherited me, in the form of 100 quiet countermeasures set in motion long before she ever packed her heels for Vegas. Now the phones don't ring. The mail doesn't come. And the last mirror in her apartment reflects a woman who finally sees her own hands at the wheel of a ship that sank months ago. The envelope came by registered courier. No return address. Just her full legal name, centered in black ink. Not Vanessa Keith. Not Mrs. Anything. Vanessa Caroline Moore. She stared at it for almost an hour. The delivery guy had required a signature, and she nearly refused. But something about the silence in her apartment, too clean, too hollow, pushed her to open the door. And now, the envelope sat on the chipped glass table next to the same coffee mug she hadn't washed in 3 days. The apartment was small, rented, and gray in every sense of the word. The curtains hung crooked. The AC unit hummed unevenly. Her phone hadn't buzzed in hours. Randall was still figuring things out, which, judging by the scrubbed Instagram photos and sudden absence of keys to the place in Miami, meant he was gone too. She slid her finger under the flap. Inside, a thick packet. Legal paper. Glossy, cold. She recognized the format immediately, divorce finalization. But what hit her harder than the content was the tone. No cover letter. No flourish. Just structure. Facts. Pages and pages of it. Every clause triggered. Every right revoked. Zero settlement. Zero shared assets. A complete asset recovery in Miles's favor, validated by her own breach of contract, legal, marital, and financial. It was like reading her own obituary, written in the language of law. The final page was stapled separately. A color printout. Familiar. At the top, her original message. Married my boss, ring clinking glasses, have fun being a loser, face blowing kiss. Underneath, a screenshot of his reply. Acknowledged. But that wasn't the end. Centered in bold, printed cleanly below both. You married a boss. I just ended one. Her hand shook. Not out of sadness, out of the weight of it. It wasn't rage. It wasn't revenge. It was precision. She stood up abruptly and went to the window, maybe to breathe, maybe to scream. What she saw outside made her freeze mid-step. 2 black government vehicles idled outside the complex. One plainclothes agent was leading Randall, or what was left of him, down the stairwell in cuffs. The back of his shirt was soaked with sweat. He was talking fast, too fast. Gesturing. Denying. His face a shade of pale she'd never seen. Another agent carried 2 large file boxes labeled Evidence, IRS CID. Tax fraud. She backed away from the glass slowly, as if it might shatter under the pressure of reality. The silence in the room returned. But now it roared. Her husband, fake, doomed, arrogant, was being marched off into federal custody. Her life, the empire of image she built on stilettos and smirks, was a crater. And Miles? He was nowhere. Not on TV. Not on social. Not reachable. Not reacting. Because he didn't have to. He had moved on. Without noise. Without cruelty. Just with the kind of absolute, clinical clarity that only a man like him, steady, precise, underestimated, could deliver. Vanessa looked at the letter again. You married a boss. I just ended one. The message she'd sent to gut him had become his epitaph for her entire collapse. And she couldn't delete it. She never had.